Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. A real honor to be in the House today to speak to C-46. I want to thank the member from Louis St. Laurent. He provided some very important points to this House, and I appreciate his passion, his hard work for his constituents, but also that he's standing up for Canadians. C-46 is evidence of another broken promise by this Liberal government. And it's actually another symbol of the top-down approach that this Prime Minister takes. He informs members of his caucus, of his party, this is what he has decided to do. This is what we will do. We're going to have marijuana legalized as of Canada Day with great celebration. And this member brought that up. And this is what we will do. And you must support this position, this plan. We saw just recently what happens when members show some independence and represent the concerns of their constituents. They are kicked off committees. They're disciplined severely because you must assimilate. You must support the position of the leader, and it's actually disappointing. This is not what Canadians were promised. They were promised transparency. They were promised that this government would be listening and consulting, truly consulting and representing the concerns of Canadians, of their constituents. And we saw a model of that actually being hammered down where one member of the Liberal caucus said, "I'm going to represent my constituents," and was severely punished. Well, I'm proud to bring the voice of the constituents of my riding, of Langley-Aldergrove. I love it. It's a beautiful part of Canada. And I've consulted about this. The fact is, I consulted a unique group of people, young professionals, my youth advisory board, and made up of grade 11, 12, and through university. And these are our future leaders. And so I asked them about this, about the impaired driving, about the legalizing of marijuana. And these are the, actually, in this government we have a minister for youth, and that's the Prime Minister himself. He says he represents this age group. This age group is saying to this Prime Minister, to these Liberal members, slow the process down. You're rushing it. You're not going to get it right. And I think of the old adage, haste makes waste. There's real truth into that, and we're seeing that played out by this Liberal government, where they're hastily moving forward, regardless of what they're hearing from Canadians, regardless of what they're hearing from the provinces and police chiefs. Overwhelmingly, they're being told as a government, slow the process down. You're moving too fast. Canada is not ready for this. Now, particularly on C-46, this was the legislation that the government, with great gusto, promised that they were going to make our roads safer. They were not going to legalize marijuana until they first had legislation in place in Canada to make sure that they keep our roads safe. They were going to get tough on impaired driving. Well, it's anything but the truth, Mr. Speaker. They are not. What they're proposing will make our streets much less safe. In my writing, you meet a lot of people, Mr. Speaker, and you hear some tragic stories when you represent your constituents. And I met Victor and Marquita Collias. Their daughter, Chrysanda, was killed by a drunk driver, and it wasn't that long ago. And they were devastated, as any parent would be if it's a daughter, a son, a sibling, a spouse, a partner. It is devastating to lose somebody. And there is part of every normal human being that you want justice if it's been a criminal offense. In driving impaired, while driving impaired and killing somebody is the #1 criminal offense in Canada. And so Canadians call out for justice. And Marquita Collias then became part of an organization across Canada that has sent literally tens of thousands of petitions to this House calling for a toughening of the Criminal Code of Canada. Now, the previous government in the last Parliament introduced legislation to toughen the impaired driving laws in Canada to include mandatory minimum sentencing. They found that the sentencing that were coming from the courts in Canada for impaired driving causing death were actually just a fine. There was none that got anywhere even close to the maximum. And so they suggested that it be called what it is, vehicular homicide, and they said, Families for Justice said, we want mandatory minimums. If you kill somebody, knowingly drive your vehicle while impaired and you kill somebody on that first offense, it would be at least 5 years. Now, 5 years is 1/3 of that. It's about a year and a half. With statutory release, it's 1/3 a sentence, you qualify for being released. So, but they asked for 5 years. And in that additional 3.5 years after the 1.5 years of being locked up and receiving treatment and programs, that additional 3.5, they would be supervised, watched, to make sure that they're not driving while impaired. So I think it was very reasonable, and it actually is where Canadians are. So the previous government, excuse me, the last government said yes, and they introduced legislation. The Prime Minister, present Prime Minister, all the leaders that were running in the last election were asked, would you support this legislation, because there wasn't enough time to get it passed in the last Parliament. Would you support this legislation? This Prime Minister wrote a letter to Marquis de Collier saying yes, he would support that. Move forward into this Parliament. And that was another broken promise. This Prime Minister did not support that. There's been 2 pieces of legislation, and one was a private member's Conservative and one was a private member's Liberal. Nope, not good enough, because he wanted to be in front of the parade, leading the parade on this. So those were shut down, and we now have C-46. Well, C-46 was supposed to have, in a promise that he made to Marquis de Collier, to Families for Justice, that there would be mandatory minimum sentences. Well, I was honored to serve on the Justice Committee just recently in the study of C-46 before I came back to this House. And this is what the Liberal government, as dictated by the Prime Minister's office, this is what we're going to have. We're going to get tough by increasing the maximum, which nobody gets the maximum, and the guidelines to the courts, to provide discretion to the courts, but the guidelines is, on a first offense, you will receive at least a $1,000 fine for killing somebody driving impaired. The second offense, the second time you kill somebody driving impaired, you will get 30 days in jail. Now 30 days, 1/3 is 10 days. The third time you kill somebody driving impaired will be 120 days, which is 40 days. Now, I was flabbergasted when the Liberal members at the Justice Committee were defending that as being just, that 5 years, which was a year and a half of incarceration in dealing with the causes of why is this person driving impaired, they said, no, that's much too harsh. And we want to give the courts discretion. The courts are bound by precedent, previous rulings of the court, and they need to have discretion, but they need guidance from this House. And the guidance, Canadians wonder, Mr. Speaker, why are the sentencing so small? Why does it not represent what Canadians want? It's not our judges. It's the people sitting across the way, the weak on crime. Canadians want tough on crime. They want fairness. They want justice. They're not getting it from this Liberal government. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, C-46 is not even close to where Canadians want. It's another broken promise by this Liberal government, a top-down approach that unfortunately will leave our streets very unsafe, and marijuana, impaired driving, alcohol, illegal drugs, impaired driving will be a growing problem in Canada because of this government. Thank you.